Talk about price setting when you are starting off in your business, and maybe even if your business has been running for a little while. Price setting can be a tricky piece of business. Set it too high, you'll have no customers. Set it too low, you might have tons of customers, but there'll be no profit. If you get it just right though, price setting can be the key to your business. So there's a few things to keep in mind when you're setting your price. The first thing is, what are your competitors charging? This is one that seems obvious, but it's something to keep in mind. What is the market already paying? Now, it doesn't mean that you have to be exactly where your competitors are. You can be a little higher or a little lower, but you don't want to be obscenely out of the ballpark when it comes to competitor pricing. The second thing to consider, and this is the one I want to focus on in a few videos down the road here, is your costs. So your costs are not just what does it cost while I'm running the clock to make or do this thing. You should also include costs such as overhead that is going to be soon coming to you. For example, if you're going to soon have to hire someone to handle some of your books, or you're going to have to hire someone to do some of your sales, you need to start to incorporate those costs and calculate what's that going to cost you before you actually have to pay for it. This way, your pricing will be right and it'll already have that included. Other things to keep in mind is the fact that electricity, leases, those types of expenses are not free. Those are your overheads that you need to keep in mind. Marketing costs, internet, web access, websites, things like those all have to be incorporated in this. And what I would suggest you do is you add up all those costs, which we're going to call burden or overhead. Keep all of those non-labor costs in one category, including your support wages if you need to. And you're going to divide that out over the amount of service that you think you can offer in the next year. And that's going to be the amount you charge just for that piece of it. The other piece of it is if you need labor or you need to buy materials and things, you'll add those costs together and you're going to call that direct costs. So you have those direct costs and you have your indirect or overhead chart costs, and you divide the combined of those two over how much work or product you're going to be able to move in the next year, and then you'll take that and you'll mark it up. It's important to keep in mind that percentages can be a little tricky. So if you want a 38% gross margin, you can't just go, I have $1 of cost, so I'm going to sell it for $1.38. That's not quite how that works. You have to take your cost divided by your selling price to figure out what your margin on that is. So a 38% markup is only going to be about 33 to 34% margin. You're shooting again for 38 to 45% margin. Again, if the market bears it and if you think you can make a living on that. But it's very important, and the exercise for this video is to make sure that you're calculating your costs. Don't just look at the amount of time that you are putting into it, but to add in all the peripherals and all the foreseen peripherals that you think you're going to need for the next 12 months. Use that to set your costs, and it will help you tremendously when you have to start doing more marketing, when you have to hire your first salesperson, when you need that secretary support. You should have that big pile of cash that you've been able to put aside and implement those tactics. This is going to give you a huge jump. You'll be able to get out of the gate fairly fast, and your pricing should be about right in line with the market. A small business will typically be able to produce services at a lower cost than a larger company, because the larger company has more salespeople, more inside sales, they have more overhead, more trucks, and all those things add up. And when you divide them back out, the cost per hour of service ends up being higher. So it's very, very important to not be extremely far underneath the market when you get started. You may have to do a little lower pricing to get the first one, maybe the first 2 clients, but as soon as you have those clients, you have some testimonials starting to go, now you can raise your rates. Quick tip here, if you find yourself so overwhelmingly busy and you can't get it all done in your new business, absolutely important to raise your prices. You want to reduce your win ratio and have fewer jobs but more profit so that you can have more money with the same amount of time. Makes sense, right? Alright, thank you for watching this video. I hope that you found this helpful. If you need more help setting the prices or with calculating your costs, always feel free to reach out to me.